I was observing a project team recently, and I watched a meltdown happen in slow motion. The team lead, a veteran manager in his 50s, sent an email labeled urgent to a 20-something analyst. 2 hours passed without a reply. The manager was practically vibrating with frustration, pointing at his screen and telling me, "See? This is the problem today. No urgency, no respect. I bet they're not even at their desk." To him, that silence was absolute proof of a generational character flaw, a lack of work ethic. But then I walked over to the analyst station. She wasn't slacking off or scrolling social media. She was actually deep in the code, fixing the exact issue the manager had flagged. When I mentioned the email, she looked genuinely confused. "Why would I reply just to say I'm doing it?" she asked. "I'm in deep focus mode. I'll ping him when the problem is actually solved." That disconnect was fascinating. You had one person interpreting silence as insubordination and the other viewing it as peak efficiency. It made me realize that most of what we call generational warfare isn't about age at all. It's about two people trying to run completely different operating systems, crashing into each other because nobody ever bothered to write down the rules of the game.
That's the perfect way to frame it. It really is a clash of operating systems.
Right.
And we spend so much time, so much energy trying to diagnose the person, the age group, the supposed character flaw.
It's a Gen Z thing or a boomer thing.
Exactly. The entire time we should have been looking at the system design or the lack of one.
So that's really our mission for this deep dive, isn't it? To figure out how you actually write down those rules. How do you build that shared operational blueprint?
That's it. We need to get away from blaming people and start, strategically designing these systems for collaboration. It's about getting everyone to agree on what success even looks like.
And based on the research, it seems to break down into a few core ideas.
Yeah, 3 main components, really. The first is about defining clear norms, and we'll talk about a tool called a co-created manual. The second is about shifting your entire focus to measurable outcomes.
Outcomes, not just being busy.
Not just being busy, exactly. And the third is about building that mutual understanding through strategic learning, things like reciprocal mentoring.
Okay, let's start with that first part, the invisible conflict. Because that manager and that analyst, they were in the middle of a war, and only one of them knew it.
That's so true. And it all comes down to those unspoken rules. I mean, your example of the manager seeing silence as disrespect, that's classic. For him, silence was a vacuum. It was the absence of work.
But for her, it was the sound of deep focus. It was the sound of productivity. The issue wasn't a lack of effort. It was just a complete fundamental mismatch in defining responsiveness.
And responsiveness is just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? I mean, what does that word even mean today?
I have no idea.
For someone who, came up in a very traditional corporate world, responsive might mean you reply to a Slack message in 5 minutes. An email gets an acknowledgement within the hour. It's about constant availability.
Whereas for someone whose job is to, write code or analyze complex data, a 24-hour turnaround on an internal email might feel incredibly fast because their value comes from uninterrupted focus, not from quick replies.
Think about video calls. This is a huge one now.
Oh, yeah. Camera on or off.
Exactly. Is having your camera off a sign of disengagement?
Right.
Are you multitasking? Are you not paying attention? Or is it that you're just trying to reduce your cognitive load so you can actually listen? Maybe your internet is just bad today.
If you don't have a rule for it, the default assumption tends to be the negative one, especially if you've never actually met that person in an office.
And it goes even deeper. Think about the concept of flexibility itself. For, say, a boomer who started their career in the 80s, flexibility was this rare, precious perk.
Something you had to earn.
You had to earn it. You got to a certain level of seniority, and maybe you could negotiate working from home one Friday a month. So they might view it with a bit of suspicion. They need proof that the work is still getting done.
Whereas for a millennial or a Gen Z worker who maybe started their career during or after the pandemic,
it's not a perk. It's the baseline. It's the default expectation. Autonomy, hybrid models, these are non-negotiable parts of the job offer for them.
That when these two invisible, emotionally charged worldviews collide, that's when you get the stereotypes.
That's it. It's cognitively easier to slap a label on someone. They're lazy, they're rigid. It's much harder to step back and say, wait, we have 2 really skilled people here who are working hard, but they never actually agreed on the protocol.
We confuse age with basic process preferences.
Absolutely. Think about introverts and extroverts. An introverted team member might need to process everything internally, silently. They want to go away, write down their thoughts, and come back with a really polished, complete analysis. An extrovert might need to think out loud. They process information by talking through it, brainstorming in real time. If a manager sees that introvert sitting silently in a meeting, they might think, oh, typical Gen Z disengagement.
When really that person is at peak concentration, they're doing their best work right there in that silence.
And you see the same thing with planners versus improvisers. Planners need those strict timelines, the milestones set weeks out. Improvisers thrive on being able to react quickly. When they clash, we don't say, oh, we have different planning styles. We say, the planner is too slow, or the improviser is reckless.
When really, if you just design a system that accounts for both, you probably get a better result.
You do. And this whole friction point has been put under a microscope because of the new reality of work.
The hybrid world.
The hybrid and remote world has it's destroyed that old base of tacit knowledge. The rules you used to learn just by being in an office.
Through osmosis. Right, you'd see who stayed late, you'd hear the tone of conversations by the water cooler, you'd know how long a quick lunch was supposed to be.
All that context is gone. Now you're just a green dot on a screen. You're trying to read intent from a one-line Slack message.
Which is basically impossible.
It's a recipe for misinterpretation. And researchers have actually identified what they call the 5C challenges of this new environment.
Okay, what are they?
They are communication, coordination, connection, creativity, and culture.
Right.
The 5 Cs.
Right.
And the thing is, if your company was already bad at, say, communication when everyone was in the same building,
moving to hybrid just pours gasoline on that fire.
It amplifies the problem into total chaos. Coordination gets harder because people are on different schedules. Connection and culture suffer because you lose all those spontaneous, informal chats that actually build trust.
And you can't ignore the sheer scale of the demographic shift that's happening underneath all of this.
You can't. Millennials and Gen Z are now the dominant force in the workforce. Their expectations around flexibility, autonomy, purpose, they're not just preferences anymore. They are reshaping the entire contract between an employee and an employer.
To succeed now, you have to treat these things as baselines, not as, nice to have perks.
And the data on this is just crystal clear. It's not a preference, it's a retention strategy. If you resist this shift, you are actively pushing your best talent out the door.
I remember seeing that stat that nearly half of all workers would think about leaving their job rather than go back to the office full time.
That's right. And that willingness to walk is a massive strategic vulnerability for a company. And it's even more pronounced for younger workers.
More so.
Oh, yeah. The data shows that about half of all employees under the age of 50 are willing to switch jobs specifically to get more flexibility. This isn't just about work-life balance anymore. It's about having control over how and when you do your best work.
So for a modern company, designing these flexible, explicit systems isn't some soft HRY issue.
Not at all. It's a core strategic imperative. It's about retaining your institutional memory. It's about business continuity. Your ability to keep a high-performing employee, regardless of where they log in from, is now directly tied to your competitive advantage in the market.
Okay, so we've laid out the problem pretty clearly. Unspoken rules are causing chaos in this new hybrid world. The solution, which seems so obvious when you say it, is write the rules down.
Write them down.
Which brings us to this idea of the team user manual. This is where it gets really practical, moving from theory to, a real co-designed document.
And the whole point of this tool is to replace that subjective judgment, that feeling of, oh, they're being lazy or they're disrespectful, with clear, agreed-upon operational logic.
What I love about this idea is how it creates psychological safety. You mentioned the introverted team member earlier.
Yes. So imagine you're that person and you know you need a full day to really think through a big proposal before you can offer a valuable opinion. Without a user manual, trying to assert that need in a live meeting, especially if you have a senior person there who's an extrovert and just wants to brainstorm, it feels like a confrontation. It's stressful.
But the manual gives you a structured, non-threatening way to say, this is how I work best.
Exactly. It promotes vulnerability and transparency and self-reflection for the whole team, not just one person.
So let's break it down. Before you can create the team's roles, everyone has to do some individual reflection first. What are the key things people need to share in their personal profiles?
The first, and maybe most important, is specificity around communication. It's not enough to just say, I prefer email.
You have to be more granular.
Way more granular. For which purpose? Do you prefer a quick video call for complex feedback? Is email the right place for an urgent request that needs a paper trail? Do you want to keep Slack or Teams just for quick questions and general updates?
Mapping the medium to the message.
That's the phrase. It eliminates so much guesswork and frustration.
And then there's the big one, Availability. This is where those generational norms really seem to collide head-on.
It's a huge point of friction. So you have to define your offline or your heads-down hours. Let's say your deep work happens between 1 and 4 p.m. You can state that in your manual. During these hours, I won't be checking messages. If it's a true emergency, text me.
That manages expectations so clearly. The manager who likes to work late at night won't be freaking out because their analyst didn't reply to a non-urgent email at 9 p.m.
It builds a firewall against that creeping expectation of being always on. It protects against burnout.
What about communication style? You mentioned pet peeves and things people appreciate. That seems to get at the heart of feeling respected at work.
It's vital for building trust. The manual asks you to list things your colleagues do that you genuinely appreciate. For instance, I really appreciate it when you explain the why behind your feedback. Or, it helps me a lot if you send a rough agenda before a meeting so I can gather my thoughts.
And the flip side, pet peeves.
Pet peeves help your team avoid stepping on landmines they didn't even know were there. Maybe you can't stand it when people hog all the airtime in a meeting. Or maybe you hate being put on the spot with a huge request in a casual hallway chat.
By writing it down, a personal annoyance becomes a documented team boundary.
Yes, and it also directly addresses those different cognitive processing styles we talked about.
The ones that can look like generational differences but aren't.
Right. The manual can literally have a section that says how I process new or difficult information. Do you need a few minutes of silence to read and absorb? Do you process best by listening quietly? Or do you need to write things down as you go? If your team knows you're a silent listener, they won't mistake your quietness for a lack of engagement.
And the part about stress signals, for a team leader, that seems like a superpower.
It really is. The manual asks you to share what you look or sound like when you're stressed. If you know that one of your direct reports gets very quiet and withdrawn under pressure, that's a signal to check in. If another one vents out loud or gets sarcastic, not to take it personally, it depersonalizes the behavior and turns a potential conflict into just a recognizable work pattern.
So once everyone has their individual maps, they come together for phase 2, co-creating the joint communication norms. This is the binding agreement.
This is the accountability phase.
Yeah.
And these norms have to be explicit and measurable. Simple things like, we will all acknowledge or reply to internal emails within 24 hours. Or, for any absence, send a text first, then follow up with an email detailing your coverage plan.
I've heard of one really effective one for managing conflict.
Let me guess. The 24-48-hour rule.
That's the one.
It's brilliant for team health. The rule is simple. After a conflict happens, you have to give it a 24-hour cool-down period. But you must address it with the person involved within 48 hours.
Or you have to agree to let it go completely.
Or you let it go. It stops that toxic resentment from just simmering under the surface for weeks and poisoning the whole team dynamic.
And I like how this framework moves beyond just communication. It starts to get into the actual structure of how work gets done through delegation.
Yes, because clear delegation is the backbone of efficiency, especially on complex teams. The manual can include a delegation matrix. For every recurring task, you assign a primary owner, a support person, and the frequency.
Can you give us a concrete example of what that looks like?
Sure. Let's take a teaching team at a school. They have recurring tasks, lesson planning, content building, material printing, grading. For, say, material printing, the matrix would say, primary owner is teacher 2, support is teacher 1, frequency is daily, by 10 a.m.
And there's a notes section, right? That seems important.
The notes section is critical. It might say, print all materials the day before they are needed. Do not wait until the morning in case the printer breaks. It anticipates the failure points and assigns responsibility. It prevents that classic situation where a critical task gets dropped because everyone thought someone else was doing it.
And finally, to bring it back to that manager in the opening story, there's the consequence hierarchy. This is about managing behavior consistently.
This is how the system maintains fairness. If a team norm is being violated, the response can't just be based on the manager's mood that day. It has to follow a clear, escalating path.
Starting with low-invasive interventions.
Always. So step 1 might be a nonverbal cue. Step 2 could be a quick private instant message. Step 3, a verbal reminder. And only after that do you escalate to a formal one-on-one conversation.
So it takes a subjective judgment out of it. The response is predictable and fair for everyone, regardless of their age or seniority.
It builds trust. It shows that the rules apply to everyone and that the system, not any one person's opinion, is in charge.
Okay, so this framework, the team user manual, is about replacing that subjective judgment with objective logic. And that connects perfectly to the next big principle, shifting the entire measurement of value from optics to outcomes.
This is the big one. This is the central ideological shift. An outcomes-driven culture is the polar opposite of the traditional output-based cultures many of us grew up in.
So let's define that difference really clearly. Output versus outcome.
An output is a task you complete. I wrote 50 reports this month. It's a measure of activity. An outcome is the impact of that activity. The quality of those reports led to a 2% increase in our market share. Or the new process I designed made ordering our product 20% easier for the client.
You're measuring the value delivered, not just the volume of work done.
Exactly. And when you do that, you automatically grant autonomy.
Which is what the modern workforce is demanding.
It is. If the goal is clearly defined, increase revenue by X, improve customer satisfaction by Y, then the organization can and should give its people the freedom to figure out the best way to get there. It lets different generations use their unique skills without forcing them into a one-size-fits-all box of how to work.
But this requires a huge cultural change, right? Especially from senior leaders who maybe built their entire careers on being the first one in and the last one to leave.
It's a massive leap of faith. They have to stop measuring productivity by butts and seats or by that little green status dot on Teams. That's what we call optics or presenteeism.
And optics can be, as you've said, a silent killer of morale.
And productivity. It incentivizes people to perform the act of working rather than just doing the work efficiently. It's a toxic dynamic.
This brings us back to that story of Julian and Priya. It's such a perfect and kind of heartbreaking illustration of this.
It really is. So you have Priya, the senior partner, who comes from that traditional world where commitment is demonstrated by physical presence and being online late at night.
And then you have Julian, the younger associate, who is brilliant at his job, but works a flexible hybrid schedule.
And he lives in constant terror of looking like he's slacking off.
Yeah.
So what does he do? He literally installs a mouse jiggler.
A device to keep his computer awake so his status icon stays green.
Yes. And it gets worse. If he finishes a perfect, high-quality report at 3 in the afternoon, he will deliberately hold on to it and not send it until 8 p.m. just to match Priya's work schedule. He's trying to perform his commitment through these optics.
The burnout from that must be immense. Not from the work itself, but from the performance of the work. He's making himself less efficient just to manage perceptions.
He was completely burning out from the performance of commitment. The breakthrough only happened when their leadership realized the KPIs were broken. They shifted the metric from hours billed or time online to milestones delivered.
Which forced Priya to value the actual report, not when or how Julian produced it.
It was that critical realization. A green dot on a screen is not a metric of value. Value comes from the outcome, period.
So once a company makes that huge cultural shift, how do you actually wire it into the organization? How do you connect what Julian is doing on a Tuesday to the company's 5-year strategic plan?
And that's where you need a solid framework for performance management. We can think of it as the 3 pillars.
Okay, what's the first pillar?
The first is performance. This is the traditional stuff. Regular reviews, looking at competencies, identifying skills that need development. Pretty standard. But the next 2 pillars are where the magic happens for a multi-generational team.
So pillar 2 is alignment. That sounds crucial for a distributed workforce.
Alignment is the connective tissue. It's the system that ensures every single person's individual goals are tangibly contributing to their team's goals, which in turn are feeding directly into the big overarching company goals.
And how do you make that happen in practice?
Leadership has to constantly, and I mean constantly, echo the why. In every meeting, in every all-hands email, they have to draw a clear line from the company's strategic objectives down to the project level. If Julian is working on a new piece of code, he needs to know exactly how that code helps the company achieve its goal of reducing customer friction by 15%.
It's a continuous exercise in providing context, which, as we've said, is so important for younger generations who are really driven by purpose and impact.
It is. If they know their daily work matters, that it's a vital piece of a much bigger puzzle, their engagement stays incredibly high.
And the third pillar is progression. This is about keeping that talent for the long haul.
Progression is all about retention. It's giving people a clear runway for their careers. And that doesn't just mean a linear climb up the management ladder anymore. For a Gen Z employee, progression might mean a lateral move to a role that lets them develop a new skill. It might mean getting a certification in a new technology.
Right.
By explicitly defining what development looks like, you create long-term loyalty.
Now, if we're truly going to be outcomes driven, all of this has to be anchored in data, right?
It has to be. And here's the frustrating part for many companies. The data usually already exists. It's just scattered everywhere.
Right. It's in the CRM, it's in Google Data Studio, it's in the HR system.
It's all there. The performance data, the alignment data, the progression data. The breakthrough comes when you actually integrate it into your management practices. We've seen a large recruitment firm, for example, that uses Microsoft Power BI.
Okay.
In every single quarterly check-in, the manager and the employee look at a dashboard together. It has the objective data targets hit, pipeline growth right next to the more subjective check-in questions about well-being.
So the conversation immediately becomes objective and forward-looking. You're not debating feelings. You're looking at the results and asking, how can we make these results even better next quarter?
Exactly. But it's fascinating to see how different companies handle this. The smaller, digital native tech companies, they're often obsessed with linking data from day one. It's in their DNA.
But the older, larger companies,
they struggle. They're dealing with decades of legacy systems, siloed departments. Just trying to get all that data to talk to each other can be a massive multi-year IT project in itself.
So we have our explicit rules through the user manuals, and we have our explicit definition of success through outcomes over optics. But a system can't be static. It needs to learn.
It have to learn and adapt.
Which brings us to the strategic bridge that makes that happen. Reciprocal mentoring.
This is the dynamic piece of the puzzle. Reciprocal mentoring is how you move beyond a fixed set of rules and create a system that is constantly learning. It's about blending the two most valuable assets a company has: the deep wisdom and institutional memory of your experienced professionals and the fresh digital perspectives and cultural insights of your younger generations. It's a two-way exchange of knowledge, not a top-down lecture.
The data on the benefits here is really surprising, especially for the mentor. We tend to think of mentoring as an investment only in the junior person.
But the benefits are profoundly reciprocal. The data shows that mentors in these programs are 70% more likely to get leadership training and develop new skills themselves.
Why is that?
Because the process forces them to articulate their own tacit knowledge, all that stuff they know intuitively, which is a core leadership skill. And at the same time, it exposes them to new technologies and cultural norms they might otherwise just dismiss. They're learning a new operating system from their mentee.
And the impact on the organization as a whole is pretty staggering.
It's a massive strategic investment with a clear ROI. Companies with these programs report a 28% increase in employee engagement and a huge 43% boost in organizational loyalty.
43%.
And retention rates go up by 22 to 30%. When you can increase loyalty by that much, you're dramatically cutting your costs for recruitment and training. It's a huge competitive advantage.
What about for the mentees? Does it actually fast-track their careers?
Absolutely. The career impact is significant. 70% of mentees say the relationship played a major role in their next promotion. And when you look over a whole career, people with mentors get, on average, 5 promotions, compared to only 3 for those without. It provides guidance, sponsorship, and visibility they just wouldn't get otherwise.
I really want to dig into that manufacturing example you mentioned with Frank and Chloe. It feels like the perfect place to see this clash of old wisdom and new tech.
It's a fantastic case study. So Frank is a 62-year-old shift supervisor. He's been there for decades. His value is his intuition. He can literally hear a specific whine in a machine and know that a specific gear is about to fail. It's deep, unwritten, tacit knowledge.
And he gets paired with Chloe,
a 25-year-old data analyst who's rolling out a new digital twin system, an AI that's supposed to predict machine failures.
So Frank probably sees her as the person trying to automate his job away.
Exactly. At first, there was huge resistance. Frank just trusted his gut and ignored her charts and dashboards. Chloe, on the other hand, found Frank's methods to be, frustratingly subjective. How do you put a whine into a spreadsheet?
So what was the breakthrough?
The relationship had to shift from instruction to a true reciprocal exchange. The program required Frank to actually teach Chloe the physical reality of the machines, to take her to the factory floor and say, listen, that's the sound, smell that, that's overheating oil.
And what did Chloe teach Frank?
She taught him how to read the data visualizations on her tablet, and they started to see the correlations. Frank's whine corresponded perfectly with a specific spike in the sensor data that the AI was flagging. The tech wasn't replacing his intuition, it was translating it into data.
It was validating his gut feeling.
It validated and quantified it. So Frank started to trust the data, and Chloe started to understand the real-world context behind the numbers. And that synthesis, that blend of tacit wisdom and digital agility, led to a 40% increase in their predictive efficiency.
Wow. That perfectly illustrates why the reciprocal part is so critical compared to old school one-way mentoring.
Traditional mentoring assumes knowledge only flows downhill, from senior to junior. And that's a flawed model for today's world. It completely wastes the incredible digital fluency and cultural knowledge that younger generations bring to the table.
Reciprocal mentoring says both people are experts.
Both parties are competent learner teachers. It breaks down the hierarchy and says everyone has a valuable capital to contribute, whether it's 30 years of experience or a native understanding of a new technology. That foundation of mutual respect is what makes the whole thing work.
So if this dynamic exchange of knowledge is the strategy, the ultimate goal is organizational resilience, the ability to handle what we now call the VUCA world.
Right, and VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It's the new normal for every organization.
So resilience is about being able to absorb shocks, a market crash, a new technology, and adapt quickly.
It's about learning together. And you can see how different generations might naturally struggle with different parts of VUCA. Boomers might prefer the stability that volatility disrupts. Gen Z might thrive on it. Uncertainty is hard when your whole career was based on the past, predicting the future. Complexity and ambiguity require a blend of deep experience and fast data analysis.
You can't rely on one generation's toolkit to solve it all. Which brings us to a fantastic metaphor for this blending process. The jollof rice analogy.
Yes, the jollof rice analogy from West African cooking is a perfect model. It frames this process as the intentional stirring of generational competencies to create a single, cohesive, resilient culture. If you just throw the ingredients in a pot and don't stir, you get a fragmented mess.
So let's break down the ingredients. Which generation is which?
Okay, so the foundation, the very substance of the dish, is the rice. That represents the baby boomers. They provide the institutional memory, the history, the continuity.
Then you have the tomato and peppers?
That's Generation X. They provide the depth, the balance, the pragmatic leadership that holds everything together.
And the flavor base.
That's the onions and oil. That's the millennials.
Yeah.
They bring the creativity, the networking, the early tech adoption that creates the rich base. And finally, you have the spices.
Gen Z.
That's Generation Z. They bring the digital agility, the fresh perspectives, the boldness and flair that makes the final dish exciting and new.
And the key is you have to stir. If the onions don't mix with the rice, if the spices just sit on top, the organization is fragmented. The reciprocal mentoring is the act of stirring.
That's it. And that stirring process actually maps directly onto formal models of knowledge transfer, like Nonaka's SECI model.
SECI.
Socialization, externalization, combination, and internalization. It's about how unwritten, tacit knowledge and written, explicit knowledge move through an organization.
So let's apply that back to Frank and Chloe. How did they move through that model?
Okay, so Frank, the boomer engineer, starts by sharing his tacit knowledge of the machine's whine on the factory floor. That's socialization, tacit knowledge transfer. Chloe, the Gen Z analyst, then takes that vague feeling and connects it to a number on her screen. That's externalization, moving from tacit to explicit.
So now both forms of knowledge are visible and documented.
Right. Then they move to combination, which is explicit to explicit. They combine their two sets of codified knowledge to create a new, better protocol. When the sensor data hits X and you hear the whine, schedule maintenance.
And the final step.
Internalization. That new combined protocol is taught to the whole team. It becomes part of the routine. It becomes the new tacit knowledge of the organization. The jollof rice is cooked, the knowledge is fully blended, and the organization is now more resilient.
And we're seeing this strategy play out in the real world, in different sectors all across the globe. Let's start with the U.S. tech sector.
U.S. tech firms like GE and PwC were early pioneers of reverse mentoring. They realized their senior executives had a massive knowledge gap when it came to digital culture.
So they flipped the model.
They flipped it.
Yeah.
Junior employees mentored senior leaders on social media, on new collaboration tools, and it had two benefits. It upskilled the leadership on the tech, but more importantly, it gave them a direct window into the minds of their young customers and their young employees.
And in German manufacturing, the focus was a bit different.
Their focus was on capturing that priceless tacit knowledge before it walked out the door. They were facing a demographic cliff with an aging workforce, so they created structured programs linking retiring boomers with Gen Z apprentices.
Not just to teach the manual, but to pass on the intuition.
Exactly. how to solve a problem on the floor that isn't in any textbook. It preserves organizational memory and dramatically cuts down on training time for new hires.
And finally, we see a similar approach in the public sector in the Nigerian Federal Civil Service.
This is a crucial case because it's about governance and continuity. Older civil servants are paired with younger ones to pass on that deep, tacit knowledge of how government really works, the politics, the history. In return, the younger officers bring in digital fluency to modernize how services are delivered.
It's an explicit strategy to future-proof the entire institution.
It's about making sure that critical knowledge isn't lost during transitions and that the organization can adapt to a more complex digital world.
What a deep dive. It really feels like we've moved from a simple problem to a really sophisticated set of solutions. To kind of bring it all together, the big takeaway for me is that all this friction we see, this generational warfare, it's a system design problem. It's not a character flaw.
It's not a character flaw, and the solutions are tangible. First, you get rid of the guesswork. You create explicit agreements with tools like team user manuals. Second, you completely change how you measure success. You move to a culture of outcomes over optics.
Focusing on impact, not just activity. And finally, you build a learning system with reciprocal mentoring. You intentionally stir the pot, blending institutional wisdom with digital agility to create a culture that's ready for anything.
And the ultimate takeaway here, I think, is that organizational resilience and growth come from a deliberate, sometimes courageous decision to unite differences, not just count them or manage them. Leaders have to actively build systems where every single generation can connect, belong, and contribute their unique value.
Designing fair, flexible, and explicit systems for collaboration is the truest path to unlocking the full potential of a multi-generational team.